This is Toledo Symphony Lab, a behind-the-scenes look at the world of classical music from WGTE Public Media and your Toledo Symphony. I'm Brad Cresswell, and joining me in the studio today are the Toledo Symphony's president and CEO, Zach Vassar, our music director, Alain Trudel, also principal second violin, and artistic administrator, Merwin Siu, and the TSO's marketing director, Felicia Canny. We have a nice full house today, and everybody here. That's really nice to have everybody sitting right here in the studio. I'm not looking at you, Elaine, because you've been on the phone the last couple of times.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you with us. So today we're talking about a concert that's happening this weekend. It's at the Peristyle, Friday and Saturday evening, March 15th and 16th, 8 o'clock p.m., This is called The Majestic Sea, and it's lots of wonderful music that is inspired by the sea and by the ocean. Some of it you know, some of it you may not know as well. So this concert is going to be a point of departure for our discussion today. We decided to talk about some undiscovered pieces. You know, the sea and the ocean evokes kind of deep, dark mystery, and that's something that translates well into music, especially with some of the pieces that are on this concert. But we're going to talk about some other pieces that we know, that we love, that maybe not everybody else knows and loves. And so we hope to maybe share some of that with our listeners today. And we'll also put some of these into a Spotify playlist, so when you go check out the podcast on our website at wgte.org/lab, you'll find that playlist there as well if you want to investigate some of the music further. But first of all, let's talk about some of the music that's on this program that's happening this weekend. Elaine, you are conducting.
Yes.
There's also a wonderful singer coming in to join us.
Yes.
So why don't you take it from here and tell us about the concert?
Okay, so our point of departure was, of course, La Mer by Claude Debussy. But in our constant will to find American repertoire that's from not necessarily only pieces that are in the last 20 years, but maybe pieces that are at least 100 years old, and see what's there and what was a standard at that time, but that people have kind of forgotten about. And we found this wonderful piece by Adley, and it's called The Ocean. So, of course, we thought, well, this is wonderful. I went to discover a little bit more about him. It's really interesting because he was an incredibly important musician in America, and we don't really talk about him all that much now. Yeah. So, I mean, he was founding with the San Francisco Symphony. He was in New York conducting the Met and then conducting the symphony. He was somebody very important. He studied composition with Richard Strauss, and actually he wrote a lot of symphonic poems, right? The stories like that.
Yeah.
So
well, it's interesting. Nice. I didn't know the connection between Strauss and Henry Hadley. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense because he wrote these fantastic sweeping tone poems.
Exactly, yeah. So he was very inspired by that. Actually, he didn't know that Strauss, when he came back to America, he didn't know that Strauss was working on Salome, and he wrote a symphonic poem on Salome just before the other. No, it's okay.
No one copied.
Poor Strauss.
Anyway, that's a wonderful
Nobody ever
piece.
said that. Poor Strauss.
So this is a wonderful piece. So they're the bookend of the concert. We also have, as you mentioned, a wonderful singer. Her name is Michelle Lausier, and she is singing actually right after she's coming to sing with us. She's singing Alla Scala de Milano, and that's going to be her big debut there.
Wow.
So
that's happening after she sings in Toledo, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to point out what comes first.
Exactly. Toledo comes first, definitely.
Well, she got La Scala to fill the rest of her month after singing with us.
For people who don't know, La Scala is this tiny little opera house, in Milan, Italy, that nobody ever, has sung at before.
Does sarcasm translate well on the radio?
No, it's not working.
It's an amazing, wonderful debut. Incredibly important for her.
She will be singing Poème de l'amour et de la mer by Ernest Chausson.
Can you translate that for us?
Yes, of course. It's the poem of the love and of the sea. It has to do more with love that's lost, and it's very deep music. I mean, it's going to be nice because the Adley has a lot of colors and it's very exciting, and the Debussy is basically all colors and impressionist painting of the sea. But this is very concrete because we have the words that she's telling us the story, and it's a bit darker music a little bit, even though the harmony is very, of course, that time very French, but the idea behind it is darker a little bit. It's very personal. the kind of poem that Maurice Beauchamp wrote on it. And we're completing the program with for the fans of movies like Twilight. We're playing Clair de Lune.
And Ocean's 11.
And also, if you saw the Godzilla trailer, right? I want to go back and talk briefly about the Ernest Chausson, because this is a French composer who wrote so many beautiful songs. I don't know if you're aware of his song repertoire, but just some fantastic songs. He died fairly young in an accident.
A horrible accident.
Bicycle accident.
Yes. I think he's a very, very underrated composer, and I think we'll be talking about underrated or undiscovered composers shortly, and I think Chausson would have probably qualified. His poem for violin is one of my favorite pieces. Just so incredibly beautiful.
That's on my list of underappreciated gems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's French color, which is not as dark color-wise as German music, but the harmony is very much inspired by Wagner always in those, as well as if you take a composer like Duparc, who also wrote a lot of beautiful melodies around the same time. But there's and César Franck, of course, he's not French, he's Belgian, but whatever. But
just like Hercule Poirot.
Yeah, there was there was a fascination of all the harmonic structure that Wagner brought, because Wagner lived in Paris for quite a while when those people were there also.
Well, the one piece that we haven't mentioned that is on the program, and that is Debussy's La Mer, which is, kind of the quintessential ocean piece. Yeah. You want to talk about that for us?
Yes, absolutely. What's interesting about Debussy is that it's, I think La Mer is kind of the beginning of what they called more, not modern music, but another era of music where until then the message, like the melody, the idea, the thematic material, like was the message. But with Debussy, and especially with La Mer, it's like the media is the message. So the colors that you have, how you treat the notes, everything that's there is actually more of the message than actual themes. So, there are beautiful themes in it, but really it's the colors, how you present it. And that's the beginning of that whole school that went throughout the 20th century.
I was going to say that was like the opening up for all the other composers that came after.
All the way to spectral music,
Yeah.
So it's very interesting and this is a point of departure, because he also, and colors, and wanting a specific colors, he will do things that people would say is wrong in the harmony, quote unquote wrong, like successive fifths and things like that. But he wanted to paint a picture. So it's music that you can actually almost taste and see, than
you hear it
to.
now, you don't realize how revolutionary it was. Even like you quoted Beethoven briefly. Yeah. When you think of Beethoven, you certainly don't realize how revolutionary Beethoven was in his age, in his day and age. But Debussy really completely liberated the idea of harmony from melodies, separated the two, and boy, what an impression it must have made on audiences at the time.
I think some people, it's either you love it or you hate it, I guess, at that time. Well, it's like you said, if we were in those days, we wouldn't have heard all the music that we've heard between, then and now, of course. So it would be like Beethoven, like Third Symphony, the Eroica. We'd be shocked at going like, oh, what's happening? There's a mistake. And, oh, no, they're coming back again. And even the Fifth. It's very something that's so special, because people didn't hear. And all that they knew is what was before. It's difficult for us to understand, because we live in an era where we've went so many directions in music that we're actually coming back to more of a melodic way of writing music, which is, I don't mind the different experiments. Personally, the only thing that I mind in musical current sometimes is the dogmatism. Like Darmstadt School of Music, the Darmstadt School is like Boulez, Stockhausen, Xenakis. I really like some of their works, absolutely. But it's just saying that, this is right, the other are wrong. And that, for me, in music, there's not a right, there's not a wrong.
It's not just in music. It's pretty much everything in life.
Can I ask a question here? Because when I think about Debussy and I think about some of the words that you've been using, Alain, to describe this, there's painting, you mentioned Impressionism.
Like
yeah, so I'm sure there are other examples of this, but it's a rare moment, I feel like, where the music and the art movement were so hand in glove. And
were they in tandem? Were they at the same time?
Always art. I always feel like visual art predates music.
They were ahead by
bit,
maybe 20 years.
20 years.
But does that lay the groundwork for the sense of the disconnection between melody and harmony? Or as I've heard Debussy's music sometimes described, all harmony and no melody. Yeah. Does that very successful art movement make these parallel fifths less revolutionary?
Well, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, generally what you see happening with the art movement is this school of artists and this technique of art coming out that is kind of put in a box by the art critics or whoever it is that is deciding what is what, and they say, oh, these were the Impressionist painters, or these are the Sambulists, or these are, these different movements that take place, and then they tended to look at musicians and composers and try to put the same, tag on them. So Debussy being lumped in with the Impressionists, and think of Debussy's music as the oral equivalent of a Monet or something like that. I think it made it easier for people to interpret his music and to assimilate it and to accept it. It was a way for them to try to classify it and categorize it. As I understand it, Debussy himself did not like being tagged or ID'd as anything. He didn't want to be an impressionist. He just wanted to do something different and something new, which he certainly did. But I mean, you can see the relationship between the kind of fuzziness of paintings of impressionist painters and the fuzziness of Debussy's music, right? The way that he kind of smeared the harmonies on the canvas.
But then when you step back and you see the bigger picture, like it all comes together, and I think that's the same experience with
you have to take your glasses off when you step back and squint a little bit.
I do think that it does really validate an entirely different type of listening. Like if you're listening to a Beethoven symphony or a Brahms symphony, it's always valuable to kind of, this sounds like it's important. I'm going to try to keep this in mind as it goes forward. And, here it is. It came back again. That's really interesting. And then you kind of have this sort of like, it's almost like you're trying to follow the plot. But with Debussy, you don't need to do that. There's a kind of it's really interesting in the same way that sometimes you step up really close to an Impressionist painting. It's great to sometimes how is he getting this sound? What instruments are doing that? Why are one set of violins doing just a plain bowing and others are going really, really quickly? And then you can just ignore all of that and decide, okay, I just want to lean back and see what this feels like if I close my eyes.
Yeah.
And it really validates both of those approaches in a way you don't have to follow the plot with Debussy in the same way that you do with Beethoven or Brahms.
Well, wash over you.
Absolutely.
There are lots of different advantages to hearing music like this performed live, and there are lots of different kind of ways that you can really enjoy a live performance. Like when you're listening to a Brahms symphony, yes, there's a lot of rousing music that you can really get into and get swept away with. And when you're listening to Debussy, it really activates the imagination. It's like a cinema experience without, the visual element. Although you mentioned, violins sawing away. There is a visual element there that the symphony does, but just the ability to experience it live in an auditorium, that is... Again, it's a level of trust, whereas an audience member, you're putting yourself in the hands of, Alain Trudel and the symphony. But by the same token, you don't have to prepare, as Merwin says. You can just let it go and enjoy the magnificent sounds that are so imaginative.
But it's easy to think that Debussy writes pretty soft, pale blue music. But there's a lot of stuff at the end of La Mer especially that is not pale blue and it is not soft. It's great and fiery. It's grand. And for me, this is that piece that always surprises me, even though I've heard it so many times. I remember when I first heard a recording with it was Toscanini and NBC Symphony. The ending just overwhelmed the recording capabilities at the time. It was just like, wow, these guys are flying. But it's just I'm so excited to hear it.
So at the end of La Mer, It was premiered at the same time as Tosca was premiered in Paris, and there's a line in just before when it's ta-da, ba-da, ta-da, and then it starts it gets faster and faster just before the end.
Yeah.
And then there comes a point where the orchestra, you hear it when the orchestra, it goes down, and you say, oh, it's good. Is there something missing? And actually there's a line that's been taken out. And there was a trumpet line that goes tam pam pa da da pam pam pa da da, and Debussy went to hear Tosca and he went like, "Whoa, it's the same line. It's exactly the same." And of course, I mean, it's not like they knew each other. Like they would, tell him, "Say, did you write this?" So he just went in and took that line out.
It's sort of like when the two girls show up to prom in the same dress.
It's horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we could talk about La Mer, I mean, for hours, but let's pivot a little bit here and talk about this idea of undiscovered pieces. The ocean, the deep, dark sea bringing up kind of mysterious, the unknown, and we're going to go with that right now. And everybody has brought in some pieces that they want to put out there as possibly not being all that well known, but that they think should be heard. And so, I think we should just go around the room. Let's start with you, Merwin, because you sent me a whole big, long list of stuff. And we should mention these are classical selections. We're not choosing, anything outside the realm, except for Alain, because he always has a little jazz on whatever list that we
it's true.
bring. But that's okay. That's okay. But, Merwin, you got a lot of stuff here. You want to pick just some of the highlights of your list for us?
Sure. I think for some reason I really have always loved the music of Grycyna Basiewicz, Polish violinist.
I've never heard of that composer.
She wrote a wonderful concerto it's almost like a concerto grosso, really, for strings. And she was a violinist at the time who was competing against David Oistrakh at that level of violinist, very, very powerful violinist. But I first heard her music when my high school teacher was looking for music for 4 violins, which there's not that much chamber music for that, but she had written this piece, and it just had the most unusual harmonies. And so I've always kind of had a soft spot for her music, and this particular concerto it's like a string quartet solo in orchestra. It's a beautiful piece of music. Nice. And just and I highly encourage people to seek her out. I think maybe I'd like to highlight a Canadian composer, R. Murray Schafer.
Just it's not R. Murray Schafer, it's R like the letter R.
Absolutely.
Oh, R. Murray.
Yeah.
I thought armory was like a little...
I like that we all heard something different.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly what happens with Schafer's music. No, but I will say that he dared greatly and created these sonic environments. He created an opera, which you basically can only listen to at a particular solstice outside. And the arrival of the main character is the timed sunrise and the singing of the birds. And it's just so audacious, but it's incredibly effective. And he wrote...
That's a case of making sure that your work is never performed, right?
It's performed once a year. But he wrote a wonderful string quartet, which captures the sense of wolves in an incredible way. Like, it's just somehow you're able to sense both the idea of pack animals and howling and chasing and hunting. It's an amazing piece of music. Wow. And he'll try anything. He wrote this this choral piece for children's choir, where he asked all of these kids to submit words that describe how the moon sounds.
Interesting.
And those are the words to this piece. These made up words that kids sent in, and it's gorgeous.
That's great. We should do something like that.
We're making up words all the time.
Well, let's move on to Felicia. What have you got? You had at least a couple of pieces that you sent my way.
Yes, right? And I think I waffled a little bit when sending those pieces, because immediately I thought of composers that we know for various pieces. For instance, Holst, we know him because of the planets.
Right.
But there's a whole nother side of him that that a lot of people don't realize, that he also composed for band music as well, like military suites.
Yeah.
And that was my first exposure to Gustav Holst before I even dove into the orchestral scene. I remember in high school band, I was very excited to play the oboe solo in the second military suite in F. It's gorgeous. It was the second movement. And then the pieces also include a lot of folk songs that he's gathered over time and put them together. And in the E-flat suite, he has this beautiful trio of instruments. It's flute, oboe, clarinet, and it's just a really sweet melody in the middle of this chaconne. So a lot of people might know him for his, the planets and other larger works like that. But there's another side, which is the band side.
Why do I want to say that Holst was a trombonist? Does that make sense?
Because he was.
He was.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
The perfect fool.
Yeah. That's the title of a piece. You're not talking to me, right?
No,
yeah.
it's a piece by
I thought you were speaking about all trombonists.
It's a really inefficient instrument, don't you think?
Elgar also was a trombonist, but Elgar was a really, really bad trombonist.
Oh, really?
I have a little story about Holst if you're interested.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, please.
So, and there's a place.
Hold on a second.
He's dancing.
Okay.
Now he has a dance to go with his...
There's
Please
your
make it
walk-on.
stop.
Walk-on
Please make
music.
it stop.
Let's hear the joke. I mean the story.
A joke. It's just, for some time I was musical advisor at the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, which is in Winnipeg in Canada. And there's a very interesting woman called Nicola who was there, who used to drive me everywhere. And she was just this, not a musician in the band, and she's just a volunteer. And then she told me, she's quite old, and she told me, oh yes, you guys are playing Holst. This we were doing one of the suites, and she told me, oh, I remember he came to my school. She was originally from England. And he would go and he would conduct the girls' school, like the St. Paul Suite.
Yeah.
The school it's dedicated to. Well, she's from there.
Oh, wow.
And they,
The school for girls in London, yeah.
Exactly. And he went to conduct, and when they did that piece, he told me we just conducted, and he fell off the stage. So he's a little goofy trombone player composer.
He taught at a girls' school. Is that the same one?
Yeah. Zach, what do you got for us?
So, not a surprise, perhaps. There is a piece by Mahler on my list, a piece by Martucci, and a piece by Khachaturian. So, Mahler wrote a piano quartet, which we performed last year on the Chamber Series. But it's this dark, early work, very brooding, which I love listening to. And if anybody didn't come to that concert or hasn't heard it before, I would love nothing more than to introduce it to you.
Yeah.
But it's so different from his symphonies. It's kind of amazing to think about what you can do when you take a composer who wrote for so many down to so few. Giuseppe Martucci is an Italian composer, of course, contemporary of Mahler's. And Toscanini, again, to go back to Toscanini, was one of his great advocates, and I always wondered, who is this guy who showed up on all of his programs? And he wrote some great symphonies. He wrote a piano concerto that's pretty good, maybe a couple piano concertos, but definitely picked up kind of a Wagnerian scene. But he has a piece called... I'm going to butcher the Italian here. La Canzone dei Ricordi, which is the song of memory.
Remember it?
Yeah. And it's a piece for soprano and orchestra, and it is gorgeous.
At first, I thought you said the calzone.
I started saying calzone. Yeah. You can hear
Which
my
is
stomach
something
grumbling.
else.
Yeah.
I remember that calzone.
Yeah. the calzone of
That
memory.
sounds like something Rossini wrote toward the end of his life.
Exactly.
All kidding aside, though, it's just it's one of those pieces that I've played for people who pretend that they don't like classical music. And
Why are you looking at
I'm
me,
just-
Zach?
So, but it's one of those pieces that makes everybody just kind of swoon a bit. It's beautiful. So that'd be number 2. Number 3 is a piece that we performed when I was a teenager in Toledo, and I'd love to see again, is the Khachaturian Piano Concerto.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great piece.
It's fiery and flashy and brassy in all the right ways.
Yeah. We're going to turn it over to you, Elaine, to finish out the program today. Who are your undiscovered composers and pieces?
Well, I don't know if they're undiscovered composers, but I have a few. I won't go maybe too extensively because I'd rather name more than so. I don't know if you know Joseph Suk. Of course, Suk, many great violinists in that family, but Joseph was a composer. Lived same time more or less as Dvorak, a little bit younger than Dvorak, and he actually dedicated a symphony. It's called Azrael Symphony to Dvorak after Dvorak passed away about a year after they premiered that symphony, dedicated to him. This is a symphony that's not played very often. It's it has those dark color of the turn of the century in that region, the Austro-Hongrois section of the world, that they all had the idea that it was the end of the old world, and they have that kind of flavor to it that's very nice. I really like a thing that's called, it's by John Sebastian Bach. It's nothing that people don't know, because it's the partitas for violin and the chaconne, but some years ago, there's a discovery that was made that they actually all fit with different chorales and different parts. It's like people found the last piece of the puzzle to put all of this together. And the Hilliard Ensemble did a recording of those chorale with a solo violinist playing the partita. And it's amazing.
So you're saying that the partita actually lines up with
absolutely
the chorale,
so
they could be played together.
And the chorales mean different things. It's like it's really a kind
like
of
the Bach crossword puzzle.
It's kind of a mystery a little bit, but you discover more about the intention behind it and the life behind it. It's really, and that recording is amazing. It's
so
really
interesting.
Nice.
What is it called?
Mormure.
Mormure.
Okay, you said I always have a little bit of jazz. There's something by Coltrane, which is called The Lost Album. It's an album that...
Coltrane is your Mahler. Like Coltrane is to you what Mahler is to Zach.
Oh, no, right? Mahler is to me what Mahler is to Zach.
Okay.
Don't worry about that.
Don't change that.
That's okay.
No, but Coltrane is a musician. It's very close to my.
But I've heard you talk about Coltrane.
Absolutely,
before.
It's an idol. What's interesting is that you have a period of his composing and playing that is more like what people are used to hear, bebop kind of music, and then there's a departure, that goes into more spiritual awakening in his playing. And there's something missing, like in the recordings of what he did. There's a hole there in 1963. And just recently, like 2 years ago, those recordings were found. They were actually, the recording company was cleaning up their... and they just gave some of those recordings in the 60s with to Naima, his first wife. And they just rediscovered that she had those recordings in her estate. And finally, there's a lot of incredible music in that, and it creates the link between his old style and this development of more spiritual playing. So that's really interesting. I have very few others. I have Hindemith that people often...
I love Hindemith.
Yeah, especially Matthijs der Mahler. It's a beautiful piece. And
it's interesting you mentioned Matthijs der Mahler, because I see so many correlations between Hindemith and Bach. There are like references to Bach throughout that piece. Yeah,
well, and Matthijs der Mahler, also the subject and the time, it's not the time it's written, but the time it represents is great. And
Mahler, again, by the way.
Yeah.
Which,
not
in
that
this
Mahler.
case,
not spelled the same way.
Which means painter.
Yeah, the painter, Matthias the painter. Yeah,
but didn't Hindemith also virtually play every single instrument, and he's like a phenomenal orchestrator because of that experience?
But there's lots of
except
musicians.
Kazoo, right?
There's lots of musicians that and composers that were forgotten because they were called degenerate by the Nazi regime. So they had like Korngold, like Hindemith, like Schulhoff. They had to save themselves and their family. So, that's why this great line of classical composer kind of stops at Strauss. And then after that, it goes in all many directions. But, after Strauss would have been Korngold. I mean, it's we see him as a film composer, but it's actually a great symphonic composer. Yeah. And Hindemith was interesting. You either like or dislike Hindemith. There's no middle ground. I think
you can learn to love.
Zach is putting up an X.
No, but I think if you find the right pieces to introduce, if you do Matthijs der Mahler, it's a great piece. You don't want to go in things that are too, scholastic a little bit.
Didn't you do the symphony here?
We've done Matthijs der Mahler.
Yeah, I thought so.
Absolutely, it's a great piece.
That's beautiful. Anyway,
is that it for your list?
Oh, I want more, maybe. Walton.
Yes.
Walton
was
Belshazzar's Feast, right?
No.
That's your choice.
Oh wait, oops.
Yeah, that was you.
No, that's great. But what for me, what's very interesting is I discovered that his first symphony. Well, I didn't discover it, but I mean, it was
floating in the ocean. Walton's first symphony.
There it is.
Let me rephrase
No wonder you
that.
like it.
Let me rephrase that. When I came across it's my wife actually who told me you should really do that symphony. And I
So
said,
she discovered it then.
oh yes, of course. No, but seriously, she had played it in some kind of touring orchestra somewhere in Europe, and she told me you should really think about that. Lots of brass. That's really, and I don't know. It's interesting. And for me, because I said Hindemith before, it's like a mix of. It's like if you have a mix of Hindemith and Rachmaninoff in the same person. It's very bizarre. Two things that don't really go together. But his first symphony has a lot of that kind of breath, of Rachmaninoff breath, but a lot of harmony like Hindemith. And for me, it's just I really fell in love with it the first time I did it. And often when I go and conduct it at different places, they've never done it. Many orchestras, you show up there and they say, really? Oh, wow. We did Façade, and we did the other, of course, his shorter pieces because he wrote a lot for television. But this is a great symphony.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to leave it at that because we're running out of time, as it happens. I want to remind listeners that the concert is happening this weekend. It's Friday and Saturday evening, 8 o'clock p.m., at the Peristyle. Alain Trudel conducting the Toledo Symphony along with guest mezzo Michel Lauzier. We'll hear Henry Hadley's The Ocean, wonderful tone poem, also more ocean-themed music. Ernest Chausson's poem of the ocean and of love in the ocean. That's where Michel Lauzier comes in. She's singing that. And we also have Clair de Lune of Debussy, as well as Debussy's monumental tone poem La Mer, or The Sea. Again, you can get your tickets by calling up 419-246-8000. More information at ToledoSymphony.com. I want to thank everybody who came in today. Merwin Siu, Felicia Canny, Zach Vassar, and Alain Trudel. This program is a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with our sponsor, the Toledo Symphony. You can download episodes of this program as a podcast by going to our website at wgte.org/lab. You can also subscribe to us through your podcast app of choice, including Apple and Google Podcasts. I'm Brad Cresswell, and you've been listening to Toledo Symphony Lab from FM 91.